So we're going to be analyzing Phillis Wheatly's poem on being brought from Africa to America. Remember, Wheatly was a slave in the Americas. Wheatly is the last name of her owner. She was a famous poet. She was the second female poet to be published in America and the first slave poet to be published in America. So here's the poem on being brought from Africa to America. "'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land, taught my benighted soul to understand that there's a God, that there's a Savior too. Once I redemption neither sought nor knew. Some view our sable race with scornful eye, their color is a diabolical dye. Remember, Christians, Negroes black as Cain may be refined and join the angelic train." So it's a fairly simple poem. It only has 8 lines, and it has a pretty standard rhyme scheme. So land and understand, AA, to and new, BB, I and die, CC, and Cain and train, DD. So very simple rhyme scheme, only 8 lines long, 1 stanza, so deceptively simple in the title. If we go ahead and we look at the words that she has chosen to italicize, we notice that they're very loaded. We've got pagan, Savior, Christians, Negroes, and Cain. So she purposely uses loaded diction. Either these words have obviously positive connotations like Christian and Savior, or obviously negative connotations like pagan and Cain. Now, the word Negroes would have been seen with negative connotation in Wheatly's time period, so she's purposely mixing these all together. "'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land." If we look at this first line, she's literally describing being brought from Africa to America, the pagan land being her home. Now, Wheatly was converted to Christianity later on. When she says that it was mercy that brought her from her pagan land, she is using an ironic tone. On the one hand, the idea that she was brought to America led to her being saved through Christianity. So the idea of God's mercy bringing her to this land so that she could be saved is one possible reading of this line. However, we know that when she was brought to Africa, she was put into bondage, she was sold into slavery, and so it's not actually mercy. It's the greed and desire for profit of the slave traders. So we have the irony of either she's being saved by God, or she has been sold into slavery. Her pagan land. She purposely uses this to describe Africa. It is not a Christian nation. She did not convert to Christianity until she came to America. So again, we have this double reading of these words. We can see Africa as being not Christian, or we can see the irony here in her ironic tone, and that this was her homeland where she was free. So in her homeland, which is seen as pagan, she was actually a free woman. However, when she comes to the promised land of America, she is actually put into bondage. So where we have the conversation with previous texts, Benjamin Franklin calling the savages savage, when actually he meant the colonists and the British Parliament, Wheatly's using the same thing here. She refers to Africa as pagan. However, she really is looking at how America is more of a pagan land because they have slavery. Line 2, "Taught my benighted soul to understand that there's a God, there's a Savior too." So benighted, vocabulary word, means darkened. So here she's purposely playing on her skin color. She is a black woman, and so she's saying, taught my blackened soul to understand. Blackened not only referencing her skin, but also her pagan ancestry, that she wasn't saved beforehand. Taught my benighted soul to understand that there's a God, that there's a Savior too. So again, we have Savior referencing Christ, Christ saving mankind, freeing people from the burden of original sin. But again, just like with all these other examples of loaded diction, there is a double meaning here. We have irony again. So she finally understood in salvation, in being saved, in attaining freedom, because her freedom was stripped from her after she was taken from her homeland. She didn't need freedom before because she was already free. It wasn't something she became aware of until she lost it. Once I redemption neither sought nor knew. So again, this ties into the ironic reading of these lines. She did not seek or know about the idea of redemption and being saved or being freed because she was already free. She didn't know that there was anything wrong with the life that she lived. She had to be told that there was something wrong with her culture, with her beliefs. In the margins, I'm just writing the second reading of this line. There was nothing wrong with her culture and beliefs until someone told her that there was. Some view our Sable race with scornful eye. Now, this again is another vocabulary word from last week. Sable is, of course, a small animal, and it is a dark color, either a dark brown or black. So with this word, she is playing again on her skin color, because remember what we discussed in class today, a lot of her texts look at the idea of religion and race together. So she's playing on the idea of her dark skin by calling it sable, but we know that they didn't view the slaves as actually being human beings. They weren't actually people. And so choosing the word sable also plays on this idea, playing on the idea of her race and her lack of humanity as a black woman or slave. Their color is a diabolical dye. So in this line, she is directly quoting someone. Now, we don't know who she's quoting yet. We won't find that out until the next line. But this direct quotation is focusing on the fact that their color, their skin tone, is a diabolical dye. Diabolical, of course, meaning evil or full of sin. Remember, Christians. So, we realize in the next line that she is quoting Christians. And she's reminding them in the next line, after she's quoted their own words, remember, Christians, Negroes black as Cain may be refined and join the angelic train. Essentially, in these last two lines, she's reminding them that all people can be saved, regardless of their skin color. That in heaven, whites and blacks will be next to each other. So she's pointing out their hypocrisy, the same way that Edwala Equino pointed out the hypocrisy of the Christians at the end of his excerpt that we read. Now, if we look at these last two lines, I mentioned to you guys in class that there's a lot going on in this poem. So hopefully you can see almost every line can be read multiple ways, that there's lots of layered meaning. But if we look at these last two lines, we really see that. So we have the first reading, which is that she's reminding her audience, white Christians, that they're being hypocritical. They are making these statements about the skin color of these slaves, that it must be an evil or sinful dye, and that these people are essentially animals. But she's reminding them that if they're actually Christian, they'll realize that everyone, regardless of their race, can be saved. She also says, Negroes black as Cain. Now, this is an allusion to the story of Cain and Abel in the Bible. And the story of Cain and Abel, Cain killed his brother Abel. So he is the first murderer of man. And he was marked. Now, it doesn't say in the Bible how he was marked. It just says he was marked. But we've talked about how lots of different people interpret the same line multiple ways. And so one interpretation is that he was marked with dark skin. So this is the idea of where Africans, where people with dark skin came from, is that they're descendants from the first murderer who killed his brother, Cain. So not only is she referencing this to know that she knows this story, but she's also pointing out the hypocrisy of this story. Also, she says black as Cain. So on the one hand, this could potentially be an allusion to the biblical story, which would make sense given the themes that she frequently uses. But slaves in the United States were often used on plantations, and they were used to harvest sugarcane. Now, sugarcane is, a plant that is boiled down, and it's made into cane syrup. Cane syrup is a dark brown color, like molasses or maple syrup. In the next line, she says, may be refined and join the angelic train. We get sugar largely in the United States from cane syrup, especially during this time period. When cane syrup, which is dark brown, is refined, it is refined into sugar. And it turns white. So we can see here that not only is she layering in allusions to the Bible, talking about where the Christians believe this dark skin of the Africans came from, but she's also layering in a criticism of how the slaves are used, and using the imagery within that, the dark brown cane syrup being boiled down and refined into pure white sugar, to just add another layer and another image. So you have these symbols here, these symbolic colors. Brown, something that's seen as being, dirty. To refined sugar, pure white, again, to something pure. So remember, this is only 8 lines long, but it's crammed full of imagery, of symbols, of additional meaning. And we talked about in class how she had to hide a lot of this. So, on a quick read through, you probably wouldn't pick up on all of this. If you didn't know all of these references, you could read this poem and it sounds like she's saying, I'm thankful that I was brought from Africa to America so that I could be saved and know Christ, and that all people can be saved through Christ. But know that there's also a really pointed criticism in here of the hypocrisy of the Christians around her, and also the institution of slavery.